output so that we can find a local.
Hey, how's it going? I hope you're all staying safe and healthy. I just participated in the Mixing Game Jam 2020, which hosted the YouTube Mix Jam. They great videos diving into and recreating mechanics from popular games. You probably already know this, but if you don't, you should check them out. Really good stuff. I took a short break from participating in Game Jam for this, because in the span of a month, I hosted.
The final video might be something like how pretty point patterns, simpler plots of primes, pretty important ponderings on properties of primes. Those primes. I first saw this that I'm about to show you in a question, math stack exchange. It was asked by a user under the name Primark, answered by Greg Martin, and relates to the distribution of prime numbers together with rational approximations or pi. You see, what the user doing was playing around with data in polar coordinates. As a quick reminder, so we're all on the same page, this means label it in two space, not with usual XY coordinates, but instead with a distance from the origin, commonly called R for radius, together with the angle that radial line makes with the horizontal, commonly called theta. And for our purposes, this angle will be measured in radians, which basically means that an angle of pi is halfway around, and then 2 pi is a full circle. And notice, polar coordinates are not unique in the sense that adding 2 pi to that second coordinate doesn't change the location that this pair of numbers is referring to. The pattern that we'll look at centers around plotting points where both of the coordinates are a given prime number. There is no practical reason to do this. It's purely fun. We're just frolicking around in the playground of data visualization. And to get a sense for what it means, look at all the whole numbers.
This month, viewers of Game Maker's Toolkit were part of a record-breaking event. Over one weekend in July, we held the GMTK Game Jam 2020, which was a Mac game making marathon where people had to make an entire game with just 48 hours on the clock. And that game had to fit a theme, which this year was out of control. The jam saw a whopping 18,000 people sign up, and they submitted an absolutely incredible 5,477 games. Again, it was more than twice as big as last year's jam. Again, it was the biggest jam in itch.io history. But this year's event was, by my numbers, the biggest online-only jam to ever. That's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much to everyone who took part. Now, of course, as much as I'd like to play every single game, that's just not possible. So instead, the public rated the games, generating 143,000 ratings. This gave me a list of the top 100 games in the overall category, which I could play, and then pick out the 20 games that I think are worth highlighting. And so, without further ado, these are my 20 favourite games from the GMTK Game Jam 2020, in no particular order. Let's start with Restless Wing Syndrome by Lecco. This game is about a bird who flaps tiny wings every time the countdown at the top of the screen empties out. So, you need to focus on positioning yourself with the right timing before the next flap. Now, the basic idea of having your jump button be on a timer was one of those ideas that got explored over and over again by different designers. Even the top 100 there were half a dozen games with this same idea, but being Restless Wing Syndrome of the rest because of one clever addition. The vibe. Having your jump be out of control can be frustrating, but letting you glide down to earth allows for more depth and new this otherwise simple mechanic, especially when you start tuning flaps and glides in a deck. But that's not all it does. The designer squeezed even more potential out of the mechanic, with each level having a different speed to its countdown and pickups that replenish your flap. This is a super polished game, which really shows the potential platforming flaws that can be derived from taking control of the genre's most prominent mechanic.
Out of control.
Okay, what if you took that idea of actions happening on a timer and applied it to music?
Все. Не знаю, какая раз. Правильно искать работу, вот что я сейчас буду делать. Непонятно. Что сейчас? В Москву еще заявление. Какое еще заявление в Москву? Конечно, нет. Как это нет работы? Ну вот это не сделать. Где работа, кем попало? Ну вот нет, ну вот на, вот это, ну вот наоборот. Да. Вот это. Да, вот я буду помнить. Понимаешь? Ну это просто да. Наоборот. Вот и что, да, я понял. Я вообще не в теме Маши, просто было интересно. А пора нам, да, тоже. Школа. Не знаю, как это называется. Нет, так это понятно. Сейчас дети, это люди будет ты сейчас везде школа, да, интернат, точнее. Да. Нет, это деньги, это то, что я деньги сказал, он тебе просягивает. Вот это, да. Нет, это думаю, и скорость, да. Ты что думаешь, так легко ты уйдешь, что ли? Эффективоскопии и так далее, да, я понял. Нет, ладно. Тебе вот это имеется в виду. Ты скрываешь, что ты каждый. Я не понимаю. А все карты свои скрывают. Ну нет, да. А все это не все, как это не все это все. Не понимаю. Ну да, специально, чтобы тебе ограбил, да. Он это думает тебе. А тебе он так думает, да. Ну нет, это все понятно, это все не хитро.
Well, you get Laser Wave by Daniel Ambrich, which is a dizzying, neon-dipped synth-wave gem that will have you swinging your mouse about like a DJ scratching a record. Here's how it works. The drum beat of the song dictates what a tiny diamond spaceship is going to do. Low notes cause you to rocket away from enemies, while high notes cause you to shoot them with a laser. What makes this really fun is that both actions are dictated by the position of your mouse, so your ship pushes away from your cursor but shoots towards it. And because you generally find yourself pushing in one direction and then shooting the other, you'll end up swinging your mouse back and forth across the desk in a rhythmic fashion to match the music. At the beginning, it's really tough, but once you get attuned to the beat of the song, it just feels great. When you can blast away two enemies in quick succession as the song plays that double high note, oof, that's the dream right there. This is both a razor-sharp twin-stick shooter and also a rhythm game that lets you physically feel the beat of the music. The Jam also saw a large number of games where your controls are in-world entities that you can manipulate, like Game Fixer Kit 2020, which sees you rewiring your control inputs while a big scary skeleton breaks your controller to bits. The best of the bunch, though, was A Key's Path by Gigaz. This looks like an innocuous platformer until you realize that the controls at the bottom of the screen can actually be picked up with the mouse and dragged into the level. This turns them into blocks that you can jump or use streaming files. But here's the rub. By removing the interface, you also give up access to that button. So that big spacebar key might be a very important, but as long as in the world, you can no longer jump. This leads to a small handful of puzzles where you're simultaneously thinking about what you gain from bringing new elements into the world and what you will lose by putting off to your actions. It can be a little fiddly, perhaps a grid system or a pinch of slowdown could help with that, but it's a great idea and there's so much more potential to mine. While a great deal of games in the Jam took the word control to be about the game's actual input controls, I'm glad that at least some smart designers explored a different meaning. Situations that are chaotic, hectic and uncontrollable. Take Puffballs from Lethandrolus, a strategy game about herding a cast of colourful critters. These puffballs rapidly multiply when in close proximity, which means the situation can quickly go from a couple puffballs chatting in a field to a whole civilization of fluffy orange blobs all bouncing about. The idea is to find the right balance between loneliness and overpopulation, as dictated by this meter up top, by strategically moving the puffballs about until there's the perfect number on screen. If you can maintain that harmony for a few seconds, on to the next one. The game soon introduces new puffball variants with unique roles. The red one, for example, eats orange critters before multiplying, so some levels will have you boosting the red population while culling the orange. It's actually very difficult, and once the ball starts rolling, it's very hard to stop it with your limited influence. So I would definitely like to see some balance tweaks, but as on the theme, this game definitely serves another. Profiler by West Boys is another utterly chaotic game.
hour later. One eternity later. Всем привет! Добро пожаловать на канал Geekbrains. Сегодня мы поговорим о конкретной профессии.
Hi, I'm Annika. I'm a classical pianist, and today we're here in Hamburg at the Boston.
По-моему, тут это просто, это уже без меня говорит уже. Он тебя понял. Смотри, ну он тебя понял, но он тебя знает уже просто. Наоборот, он про себя и говорит.
Quality Center, and I'm so proud to announce to be a Boston ambassador. Piano is my best friend,
Должна же быть
and
какая-то разгадка на это, понимаешь, да. Да, понял тебя уже, про себя, ну вот наоборот, да, понял. Ну, про себя, вот это и есть она самая. То есть, выходит, она несчастная, знаешь, вот о нее тебе не скажет. Ты ее смотришь, да, она несчастная, и она делает зло прямо сейчас. Да, то, что я вот сейчас на нее смотрю, что она симпатичная, это в квадрате значит зло. Да. Что она хорошая, более, значит, не совсем хорошая, да.
My piano is my best friend, and I couldn't imagine life without it anymore. So it's very important for me.
Просто детей кормить надо, не понимает, да, просто надо понимать. Да, потому что, ну, уж прости, как говорится, мужа нет, значит, или вместо мужа, что ли, у тебя муж, то есть муж, у тебя философ, он говорит, этот мир, говорит, фигня вся, это у тебя мужик, говорит, кто за этот мир отвечает, может быть, это как-то коррелирует, я не знаю, я понял, да, что деньги делают, потом тебя присядут, да. Ты кому-то просто, понимаю, по-своему говорит, ну да, ну как угодно, короче. С любой стороны, это все регион всяких разнообразий, там, интересно это все, да. Я тебе просто говорю, что женщина она должна быть, ну она про себя так говорит, да, а все остальное, как бы, да, агрессия, зло и чрево адово, если угодно, да. И ненормальная психиатрия, да, понимает. А я вот на это смотрю, и никогда про это не скажешь, правильно? Нет, ты зацени, как бы, как оно на самом деле. То есть ты, да, делай вывод, но ты так не думаешь просто, да. Ты думаешь, что сю-сю-сю, да, он тебе про себя так и говорит, наоборот, да. Вот он тебя понимает. Оказывается, все несчастье. Да, и не просто счастье, зло. Зло, да, то есть, да. Потому что она должна быть, значит, она не здорова, не на всем месте. Почему? Потому что ее, да, понимает. Как бы, да. Да, ну, у нее порожная, такая вот, которая, ну, такая, например, психиатрическая называется. Да, бывает. От Зарикайды, вот, Зарикайды, значит, надо. Это самый смаканный, да. Да. Женская. Я сам потому что не понимаю. Я смотрел, как бы, да, нормально же профессионал, какие там, да, как бы, нормально, все как бы нормально, да, как бы. И даже нормально, как бы, да, как бы, типа, тоже это говорит. Ну, нет, понятно, что... Так нет, ты их спросишь, они, да, что тебе ответят, ну, знаешь, что, нет, наоборот, только, да. Пошло на все к черту, потому что, да, наоборот, видишь, нет, не потому что, да, понимаете, да, это не мои проблемы, да. А общие такие, да, понимаю. Нет, это тема, вот я тебе сейчас что-то сделал, ты меня слушать не желаешь. Да, например. Ну почему? Как бы, да, понимаю, так, по-любому, то есть надо просто, да, не знаю, это дело не в этом, да. То есть, да, и почему женщине не страшно за то, что она, жизнь ее вот такая вот и пройдет, слова, ну, там, да, то есть, не очень, да, понимает это. Я не знаю, я как, Почему ты не испугался? Неужели некому испугать тебя и ее, да? Да, понимаю. Нет, нет. Ладно. Понимаешь, покрасивенько у вас. Это жутко просто. Так они же немцы там у вас фильмы. Ладно, ладно. Вот говорят, там результатов-то нет. Я приезжал, человек говорит. Нет, нет, понимаю. Ладно, ладно. Тоже карьера же профессиональная, то что, понимаете. Ладно, да, просто. Это что ли? Да, да дурака валяет он так, да, просто.
Rather than just the primes. The point 1, 1 sits a distance 1 away from the origin with an angle of 1 radian, which actually means this arc is the same length as that radial line. And then 2 has twice the angle and twice the distance. And to get to 3,
ты в одном
3,
месте можешь, как эти говорят, ты только одной, да, понимаю, да. Некому видишь, спрятаться, да, вот видишь, да, понимаю.
One more radian, with a total angle that's now slightly less than a half turn, since 3 is slightly less than pi, and you step 1 unit further away from the origin. I really want you to make sure that's clear will be plotted.
Видишь, это сомнение, то есть это худшая жизнь. Если у тебя дети, ребенок там, если под мужем ты будешь ходить, да, понимаешь. Смотря сколько у него денег, да, вот, видишь. То есть как бы интересно, да, то есть и нормально, то есть это вот это добро называется, да. В мужском смысле тогда, да, получается, да, понял, да. Ну нет, это понятно. То есть, смотря еще что ты будешь смотреть, да, понятно. То есть, какие условия будешь ставить, да, какой еще расчет у тебя хитрый, интересный, доброкозненный, да. Да, вот это. Вот, намного проще, это можно сказать, да. Ну, это ясно, это да. Не просто, да, желательно, чтобы отец тебя, да, ну, он так не считает, ну, чтобы семьи, да, ну, круг семьи, там, 2 фиг его знает, меня не касается это, да. Меня это не волнует, все равно, да, то есть, чтобы тебя отдали, и чтобы не ты сама, да, ну, не знаю, как это.
Always depends on understanding it. Each step forward is like the tip of a hand, which rotates 1 radian each tip, a little less than a 1/8 of a turn, and it grows by 1 unit every step. On understanding it. Each step forward is like the tip of a clock hand, which rotates 1 radian with each tick, a little less than a 1/6 of a turn, and it grows by 1 unit at each step. As you continue, these points spiral outwards, forming what's known in the business as an Archimedean spiral.
Да, понимаю. Скорее всего, там не может. Ты думаешь, что вот, ну, твоим предкам бы не понравилось. Давай спросим. Тук-тук-тук. Да, понимаю. Я, к примеру, тебе просто говорю. Например, ты... Меня не волнует это, я просто тебе говорю. Вот ты должна расти большой. Да, понимаю. Ну, просто как вот, чтобы, ну ладно. Не волнует, потому что...
Very move to knock out every step prime numbers. It initially looks quite random. After all, primes are famous for their chaotic and difficult to predict behavior. But when you zoom out, what you start to see are these very clear galactic-seeming spirals. And what's weird, some of the arms seem to be missing. And zooming out even further, those spirals give way to a different pattern. These many different outward-pointing rays. And those rays seem to mostly come in clumps of 4. There's an occasional gap like missing its teeth. The question for you and me, naturally, is what on earth is going on here? Where do the spirals come from? And why do we instead get straight lines at this larger scale? If you wanted, you could ask a more quantitative question. Count that there are 20 total spirals. And then up at that larger scale, if you patiently went through each ray, you'd count up a total of 280. And so this adds a further mystery of where these numbers number are coming from, why they would arise from primes. Now this is shocking and beautiful, and you might think that it's just a hidden symmetry within the primes. But to state your expectations, I should say that the fact that the person asking this on Math Exchange...
Нет, ты что думаешь, я тут это, да, ну нет, ну что ты хочешь, она поняла тебя просто. В жизни кроме тебя жить никто не будет, да, и как бы знать, да. Наоборот, ну нет, наоборот, ну нет, что ты, блин, что, он о себе так думает просто, да. Себя не так думает просто, да. Ну да нет, себе, ну ничего, это нормально, это правильно, это правда жизни, да, то есть, вот популяция, да, понимаешь как, да, он про себя так же говорит, ну вот и все тогда, вот и все, я просто вот знаю, я вот типа того, и так мне же надо знать, что, может, да, как бы, как у нас понял просто, я, да, я понял, да. Нет, это в натуре как бы так, да, я понимаю, ну, наверное, нет, ну, значит, нет. Так значит, да, понимаю, да. Ну, вот не надо. Пощадите,
For just $67, you can make as many videos as you want and never pick up a camera or use any fancy editing software.
Hey there, how's it going? If you know me, you may know that I have a bit of a problem with game jams. I like them a lot, and normally have to limit how many are participating to not perpetually be doing one. So when I was contacted about a YouTuber game jam where everyone makes a dialogue along with the game, I was like, so the ultimate game jam is basically a mini game jam competition with 3 different rounds. Round 1, we're like any game jam. All contestants are given a theme and they build a game based on that. Then the judges pick a round of cuts. I leave half. For round 2, all remaining contestants have to add a mechanic to their game. I'm going to be perfectly honest here, I have no idea how this is actually going to work, but I figured if I made it to round 2, then I'd figure it out then. Otherwise, I don't have to worry. After round 2, there's another round of cuts. And I believe round 3 was the same, and then a winner is declared after that. Again, this is how I used to understand it. If I misinterpreted it in any way, and I make it to later stages, then I'll let you know then. And the last little bit of info for clarity, all contestants actually worked on their games at different times, but we all only had 7 days to actually work on our game. To accommodate everyone's schedule, we all chose a 7-day block within the month. I chose the 3rd through the 9th, but some contestants didn't start until well past that, which is why this video is being made a couple weeks later. I think that whole backstory, so let's jump on it. I was all set to receive theme at midnight on the 3rd, but as I checked the Discord, no one else seemed to be online. I don't think I'm the only one in the United States, but I know both the hosts and several contestants are all in Europe, so I just busied myself getting my Evernote document ready. As you can see, I basically had a game I already wanted to make. I didn't really have to wait long. I ended up getting the theme about 20 to 30 minutes, which I definitely took full advantage of when it came time to submitting my game, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The theme was decay. Usually, with a game jam theme, I try to do something other than the first thing that pops into my head. Mostly because I assume others are going to do something similar, and I want to try to stand out. So, after a while of thinking, I decided I was going to do the top-down shooter. For some reason, that's what my brain said I was making. So, I had to figure out how to make it fit with decay. I could have the weapon decay over time, that's basically ammo, or the health, but that seemed a little too obvious. Then I thought the ground. What if the magic that keeps the world together is decaying and causing it to crumble around? I have made a game with falling floors in the past, but it was a tile movement puzzle game, so I thought, what if I combine the floor mechanic from that game called Cross the Gap with a top-down shooter? Now that I had an idea, I did some basic setup work on the project, but since I got the theme around midnight, it was already too late to really get any good work done, so I headed to bed. I started off the first day at a good pace. I quickly added player movement, an aimer that would follow the mouse, a dash that would let the player move over gaps in the floor, and the falling floor itself. I used the same ideas for the falling tiles that I used in Cross the Gap. Stand on the tile and it starts to shake. Then when you step off it, it will fall. That's pretty different than Cross the Gap, where the tiles would start to shake and fall when you stepped on. And that small change ended up causing some major issues in about a day or two. So thinking the basic mechanics were in and working, I started on some art. I tend to bounce back and forth between development and art. I'm not the kind of dev that can build everything with placeholders placeholder art and then slot the sprites at the end. That process just really doesn't work for me. So I jumped in to try and design a character, and coming up with this was really tough actually. I went through several different looks and just wasn't happy with any of them. And also, whatever the hell this is. Before eventually defaulting to the standard hooded sorcerer with no face. I hastily slapped that into the game as well as an idea for the ground tiles and made my first update over Discord. This was one of the requirements of the jam, just took a quick post every day to keep everyone accountable. I started off day 2 by jumping in A sprite and getting the animations created for the player. I really liked these game out. They're super cute and I love that little shuffle walk. Then I spent some time adding it into the game and using it a little bit. The eyes were also kept separate so I could have them follow the cursor. Not at all necessary, but I wanted to try it out. And having them separate really helped that cartoony feel I was going for. I added a little flash indicator to let the player know when their dash is recharged. The dash animation was cute. It needed a little more than just the particles that were already there. So I added an after effect, which was super easy and gave a cool look. I created a separate sprite of one of the frames of the dash animation and set it so when it's created, it would automatically start fading away and destroy itself if it was fully gone. I set its blending mode to overlay, and then I just spawned one at the player's position every 0.1 seconds while the player's dashing. I also added a little effect to the wand when the player shoots. With the player looking passable, I decided to start working on an enemy. I realized that with the way the ground works, enemies that could walk might be an issue. So I took the lazy approach and decided that all of the enemies will fly, or at least move. I added a simple enemy that will follow the player once their detection zone has been triggered. And that's about the point where I called it a night. All day at work, I'd been thinking about what I was actually going to do with the game. At this point, I'd been doing all this work, basically just hand-waving the actual game and what the point of the game would actually be. I usually try not to do this, but for some reason, that's just how I treated almost everything this jam. Basically, I would see a problem and just kind of ignore it and work on something else. I'm not going to beat myself up over it. Sometimes you're just not in the right headspace, and that's fine. So even after all that, the first thing I worked on was adding walls so that the player couldn't just pass over everything. But that ended up causing trouble with the player when they're dashing. It was around this point that I also started to notice some issues with the ground. Sometimes the tiles just wouldn't fall, or other times just generally acted buggy. It was at this point that I didn't feel like working on it anymore. So I went back to the art because I realized that the ground art I had made was in the wrong resolution and didn't look right. I then spent the night fighting with the art as well. It was just one of those days. I ended it a bit down and a little unsure of what I was doing, but hoping to get back to it tomorrow. Day 4 was a get your crap together kind of day. After work, I jumped in and tried not to overthink things. I created sprites for the enemies and projectiles. Then I set in remaking the ground mechanic. I said it before, I basically used the idea from another game. The player steps on the tiles, they shake, and then fall. But in this game, you step on the tile, they shake, and they don't fall until you step off. The problem is checking the collision boxes gets real funky when one of them is shaking all over. So I added a new sprite that I can lay out the levels with and acts as a hitbox for the ground. When the level layout begins, it will create the floor tile art on its own, and set its art to one of the 8 different floor tiles I made. Really, they just all have different crack patterns. But the actual art that can shake no longer interacts with the player at all, making everything work the way it should. I probably should have seen that problem coming, but hindsight's 20/20. I threw in a quick temporary background that I figured I would fix up later. Spoilers, I didn't. And then I started trying to figure out how I was going to lay out and design levels. I didn't feel like I had the time to do procedural levels, which is what my brain was telling me I wanted to, but I knew I didn't have time for because I've never done it before, and I'm already on day 4, and I still haven't figured out the full game. So I decided you would need to kill a certain number of enemies on each floor to unlock the exit and continue. I went back and forth with what the exit should be, and in the end, I went with the most magic-y, out-of-the-box thing I could think of. Not really, I just made a ladder. But seriously, look at the character skirt up. That's adorable. Okay, I thought I have level progression kind of figured out. Time to get back to art. I need more enemies and a final boss. I designed all of them off of the original enemy I had already made, so they all kind of had a similar look. It's a weird one and I don't know where it came from, but it's what I made. In my head, I still wanted this game to be somewhat roguelike-ish. I don't know